Coming up, new books feature very different views of Native life. We meet youth who are making a difference in their communities. And Buffy Sainte-Marie takes the stage. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Ku'watsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start with new federal policies aimed to improve Indigenous stewardship throughout the United States. The National Park Service released new guidance on Wednesday to strengthen Native representation in the management of federal lands. The new policy on what's called co-stewardship is meant to give a stronger framework to park managers to work with tribal nations. Experts say there are many benefits to co-stewardship. That includes NPS Director Chuck Sams, who reminded his federal agency that all national parks are located on Indigenous ancestral lands. He added that this new policy will ensure tribal governments have an equal voice in how those lands are used. Already, the National Park Service has 80 of these agreements. Some of those are at Canyon de Chelly, Glacier Bay, and Mount Rainier National Parks. Also Wednesday, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the Bureau of Land Management, also released a co-stewardship policy. An Indigenous woman is hoping to create awareness about residential schools in a unique way. She is walking across Canada for residential school children who can't. APTN's Tamara Pimentel has the story.
At exactly 2:15, Jazz LaValle and Virgil Moore departed from the former Assiniboia Residential School in Winnipeg to begin a 3,500-kilometer journey.
We love and we care. It's the same deal as last year. I just don't want it to die out, and I want our survivors, I want children to know, there's people here that care and will walk a million miles.
Last year, the pair walked from Winnipeg to the Kamloops Indian Residential School to bring awareness to the 215 unmarked graves that were discovered. Today, with a backpack full of items representing the children, they continue that walk to Nova Scotia, stopping at other residential schools along the way. For LaValle, the walk has many meanings. She was born with dislocated hips and was told she would likely be confined to a wheelchair her whole life. She says the ability to walk for those that can't is her purpose.
Don't want it to die out. I want it to keep going. It's not something that you just go to sleep and forget about the next day. It's us that keep it going. It's up to us to keep it going.
My purpose of walking with Jazz is to protect her, make sure she's safe, make sure she's comfortable.
Moore is from the Crane River First Nation and attended day school.
My mom was a residential school survivor, and they hid my dad in the bushes when they were coming for him for residential school. And they took half of the rations away from my granny and grandpa because of that.
Moore says last year's walk joined people together. It was an opportunity to educate while sharing stories from other survivors.
We met a lot of people that talked to us, and these were non-Aboriginal people from all walks of life. I would like to see people come out, tell more stories about what happened to them. We heard stories from people that have never been told before. These people never told anybody those stories until they saw us. So that means something.
Next year, LaValle plans to walk to Canada's northern coast in Tuktoyaktuk, and the year after to New Orleans to touch the Gulf of Mexico. But for this walk, the hope is to make it to Nova Scotia in 90 days, to share the stories of survivors and those who never made it home. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Well, the largest tribe in the U.S. is receiving a record-breaking budget for the coming year. The Cherokee Nation passed a $3.5 billion budget last week. This is the largest operating budget in the tribe's history. Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. said the funds will provide a, quote, blanket of protection for Cherokee citizens and visitors. Part of that will go towards expanding the nation's criminal justice system. That includes an additional $6 million towards helping the tribe meet its responsibilities under the U.S. Supreme Court's McGirt decision. The Cherokee government anticipates hiring more than 5,000 employees to help maintain public safety under McGirt. There are also plans to hire more positions in public health, transportation, and infrastructure. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Returning Home is a new book about the Intermountain Indian School in Utah. It features artwork and poetry from the students. Farina King is an associate professor of Native American Studies at the University of Oklahoma and is one of the three authors.
This book started being a collaboration between myself and doctors Michael Taylor and James Swenson. Actually, Michael Taylor has been a friend of mine for many years, and he knew that I had worked with Navajo Diné boarding school experiences since I'm a descendant of boarding school survivors. And he knew that Navajos were mainly sent to Intermountain at first for the first 20 years. So then he reached out to me and told me about all these collections of poetry, art. And I knew about these stories too, mainly from relatives and friends who kept sharing them with me. So it was an effort to connect with the community, the actual alumni, and these collections that have been scattered or gathered in university archives, like at Utah State University.
King relates an inspiring story from a student.
What was inspiring about this was actually a good friend of ours named Jesse Holiday from Sabi in Disguise, which is Monument Valley. It's famous for the iconic images in movies, and I identified as the West, but it's Diné homeland, and it was where Jesse was from. So I started to see that Jesse had artwork. He'd do watercolors of home, and I talked to him, and he told me he also went to boarding school. And I thought, whoa, where's this disconnect of, he told me that he actually learned how to do paint and watercolor in boarding school. So that was very impressive to me because I thought, about all these dark aspects and sensitive aspects of boarding schools. But he then told me art pulled me out. That's how he got through a lot of those hard times, was envisioning home and expressing that through his art. And we found that with poetry too. So putting that together in a book was also what Intermountain alumni asked us to do. And we felt like we had to do that for them, for their children too, and posterity, that they know they're artists, they are poets, even though they went through so much hardship.
King's father nearly died in a blizzard at boarding school.
We are descendants of survivors, and we don't have to constantly be gripping on to life. It's that connection of family, home, lands, and water that bring us that hope and keeps us going. And the hope is healing. And so I know my father is very fortunate. It was a miracle that he survived. And when he was a child going through that snowstorm, and it happened that there was a rancher out there who was able to take him out of that and save his life. And I'm grateful for that. But I also want to bring light to these dark, often hidden stories, so that all of us realize every child matters and every child can be a mother, a father, an auntie, an uncle, a leader in the community. And it's all tied into these things.
That was Farina King. When we come back, Buffy Sainte-Marie takes to the silver screen. The Toronto International Film Festival wraps up this weekend. ICT's special correspondent Miles Morisseau was there for opening night.
Well, it was the 47th Annual Toronto International Film Festival, or TIFF as it's known, and it had a large Indigenous representation of films. There were over a dozen films, about 8 from Canada, 4 international, and the festival opened up with the the world premiere of the Buffy Sainte-Marie documentary, Carry It On. Buffy Sainte-Marie was at the festival to take questions after the showing of the film. Just remains just this absolutely dynamic, passionate artist, political, social activist. I mean, even the question answer after, she's putting ideas out there to continue to encourage people to, be involved in making, strengthening Indigenous arts, Indigenous rights, are speaking up for our people. This is her life, and it just so much passion. A very impressive person, individual in the movie captures that. So that was a great thing to see.
Let's take a look at what Buffy Sainte-Marie had to say about the doctrine of discovery.
The Pope, who I like very much, I really admire Pope Francis, and I would love to see him, since he's a lot of Indigenous people are yelling at the Catholic Church, do away with the doctrine of discovery. In their perspective, they have already gotten rid of the doctrine of discovery. They abandoned that a long time ago. However, the countries that were colonized with under the words of the doctrine of discovery, which says to force their persons into perpetual slavery, to kill them and to take all of their land. See, the countries that were colonized under that rule it's still in their books. So don't tell me that was a long time ago. The 15th century was a long time ago. Ruth Bader Ginsburg used the doctrine of discovery to defeat the Oneidas. And that wasn't very long ago. And she regretted it for the rest of her life, but she did it. She wrote the majority opinion, believe it or not. That's how ignorant even the smartest people are about Indigenous things.
Miles Morisseau commented on what the passing of Queen Elizabeth means to First Nations people in Canada.
There is that unique relationship. It is, it's a crown, often referred to a crown Indigenous, a crown First Nations relationship. So the role of the monarchy, the role of the Queen has been very important. Should be noted, the Queen's last official statement was condolences to the James Smith Cree Nation that suffered that tragedy the week before the Labor Day weekend. That was her last statement, died the next day. And the Okama, the chief of James Smith Cree, offered his condolences. So a lot of condolences, certainly the issues all around, as they say, very complicated history, the difficult history of the monarchy and its role in colonization. All of those things are certainly part of the discussion here in Canada. But that relationship that the Queen had over 70 years as this symbolic leader certainly there's a lot of heavy emotions on both sides here in Canada.
That was Miles Morisseau reporting from Canada. Well, Coos Stevens is honoring his great-grandfather once again in his second annual Remembrance Run. ICT's Sierra Alvarez has the story.
Coos Stevens is the latest chapter in his family's long story. His great-grandfather, Frank Quinn, escaped from the Stewart Indian School 3 times, starting at age 8. In the early 1900s, Frank would run across the desert and back, spanning 50 miles to his family's Yerington tribal lands.
Yeah, this run is really just to recognize what he had to go through and, just raise awareness for it. really is to raise awareness and make people more compassionate towards, Native Americans healing from historical trauma and what we have to deal with on our day-to-day lives.
Frank was one of countless Indigenous children forced to attend Indian boarding schools in the U.S. Now Koo is retracing his ancestors' footsteps for a second time. About 40 runners and walkers accompanied Koo on this year's Remembrance Run. Delmar Stevens, Koo's father, started off the journey with a blessing. Journeyers completed 25 miles, with stops every 5 miles to rest and hydrate. A support team followed the participants to give out food, water, and encouraging words. The participants had to camp alongside the path to Stewart Indian School over the course of 3 days. And on the last day, they visited the cemetery attached to the school. The Old Stewart School Cemetery holds over 100 graves of Native children who attended the institution.
We're the only schools in the world that have graveyards at our schools, and I think it's pretty sad that we have to live with that, knowing that.
Those who attended the Remembrance Run took this time to give prayers, honor those who were forced to attend the boarding school, decorated graves, and made offerings. Journeyers arrived to tour the Stewart Indian School Cultural Center, and a painting by Michael Rodin was dedicated to Koo's grandfather. This event is gaining traction with big names. U.S. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto visited with Koo's family at a gravesite where many people carried orange flags and wore orange shirts. Orange is the color that has been adopted in Canada to honor Indigenous children who went to residential schools. U.S. Olympian Billy Mills showed his support, which is fitting because he is one of Koo's idols. Mills is a former track and field athlete who won a gold medal in the 10,000-meter run at the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. Not only did Mills show up, he gave Koo and his family $10,000 to make the event happen through his nonprofit organization, Running Strong for American Indian Youth. In Phoenix, Arizona, Sierra Alvarez, ICT News.
That was Sierra Alvarez, an intern with ICT this semester. She's a student at the Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Pacey Smith Garcia is also an intern. He brings us this story of young Inuit people who are learning ways to uphold their traditions. Let's watch.
There's a new program for middle and high school students in Nunavut in northern Canada. The Young Hunter program teaches these students time-tested Inuit hunting practices, and it also blends new technology. The program is run by the Auckland Move-It Society. The teachings come as hunting is a key practice in the far northern regions. Grocery costs are high in the area due to shipping prices from the south. Over time, the process of hunting has changed. Items of hunting such as kayaks and harpoons have changed to motorboats and rifles. Cookik Baker is the executive director of the program. In an interview with Hakai magazine, she said, "We want our kids to grow up to have the skills to use the best of both worlds." The land and the sea have also changed because of climate change. The waters on the coast have receded, posing threats for boats. The reefs and the rocks that were previously deep underwater are now barely covered and can cause wrecks. The Young Hunter program also works to ensure the shifting coasts are properly mapped using a program called hydroblock technology. Organizers say this software not only maps routes, but also maps tomorrow's Inuit identity. In Phoenix, Arizona, Pacey Smith Garcia, ICT News.
Telling stories is what Ramona Emerson usually does with video, but this time she's written a thriller novel named Shudder. It's a supernatural horror based near the Navajo Nation in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, well, Shudder basically tells the story of Rita Totochipi, who works as a forensic photographer in Albuquerque, New Mexico for the Albuquerque Police Department. But it also fluctuates between her days as a forensic photographer, as well as her childhood growing up on the Navajo reservation. And through that story, you learn that Rita has a very special gift that she hides in her present day, which is that she can speak and see ghosts. So she can communicate with people who have passed over. And as a Navajo person, that's a pretty taboo thing, a pretty taboo gift to have. And so the story, kind of centers around that and a victim of a homicide in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who kind of makes Rita's life really tough.
Emerson tells us about her career as a forensic photographer.
It was very early, like late 90s when I got out of film school. And there wasn't really a film industry here in New Mexico. So I worked mostly as an independent filmmaker, as well as working as a forensic photographer and videographer in Albuquerque. So I did that for 16 years. At that point, I was just making films, so I had no intention of becoming a novelist or even writing a book. That seems so far removed. But over the next, I don't know, maybe 16 years or 10 years of just dealing with all of that stress working in forensics and, of course, making a bunch of films at the same time, I quit the job and joined a writing workshop, and which is where the story started. Started as a bunch of short stories about my own relationship with my grandmother and some, a smattering of spooky stories that I told. But I think it really, when I got into the MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, I had originally wanted to have it be a screenplay, but my mentors and people encouraged me to make it into fiction. And I took the big leap. Instead of doing a screenplay or screenwriting MFA, I got my fiction MFA. And in the process of being there, doing my MFA, I wrote the novel. So my master's thesis was my 360-page first draft of my book. So it took me 10 years to write the book, though. I think mostly because I was working as a filmmaker at the same time. So I was trying to juggle both things. I was making a film called The Mayors of Shiprock at the same time, and it was really hard to do both. So it took a lot longer than a lot of books do.
Emerson describes the job.
For me, forensic photography was a lot of evidence. You take photographs of people's injuries, you take a lot of video of the way people live after they've had an injury. I spent a lot of time underneath vehicles, measuring scuff marks and impact areas and looking at the way accidents happen, measuring skid marks, photographing evidence, which sometimes is unfortunately people, and sometimes it is, a vehicle, or it's a home, or it's a construction site. It's the site of an explosion that may have happened. So it's whatever they need you to do when they need you to do it. You're always on call, and you got to go take photographs of whatever it is that they're trying to document and get evidence of. And it's an important job. It's a tough job, and as a Navajo person, as a Dene, it was a very tough job to have. And my grandma scolded me a lot for keeping that job for 16 years. But it was a good way to make money. And also my boss afforded me the chance to use the equipment at the forensic studio. So that helped me make documentaries. And I think that's probably why I stayed with the job for so long, because it gave me access, to equipment and to editing units. And it helped me make films for 16 years.
That was author Ramona Emerson. A new documentary film for Walter and Josiah focuses on the Flathead Indian Reservation in Montana. With September being National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, ICT senior correspondent Patty Tholahungba spoke to the executive producer. Dana Hewenkorn talked with ICT Monday about the 22 citizens who died by suicide in 2017, which her film is based on. Let's watch the trailer.
Is it going? Give it a blow!
The thing I think about most is what pushed them to do it.
2 basketball players from Two Eagle committed suicide.
We didn't know, that was going to be the last time watching my boy play.
Why did Walter and Josiah have to do this, They could still be here with us today.
Montana's Native Americans have the highest suicide.
The rates are growing.
There's been a 200% increase. To break that cycle, do we break it from the outside or do we break it from the inside?
One thing I believe is part of this trend in suicide deals with the treatment of Native American Indian people throughout history. Your hair is too long. Your skin color is no good. Your language is no good. Your religion is no good.
Now we need to come together as a community to reverse this.
We're trying to bring each other together in memory of Walter and Josie.
Things are happening today that they didn't happen back then. The values of life have changed. The values of who we are as people have changed.
Oh, brother, you left us too soon. Hey-oh, hey-oh, hey-oh.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.